No more interiors should be painted. No people reading, no women knitting. There should be living human beings who breathe and feel, suffer and love. I should like to produce a whole series of such pictures. Edvard Munch, Norway's most powerful painter, wrote this in 1889, aged 26, at the outset of his most intensely creative period. Over the next 10 years, Munch was to create a kind of imagery breaking radically with established norms of content as well as of pictorial style. Ashes, from 1894, now in the National Gallery in Oslo, deals with one of his recurrent themes, the problematic relationship between man and woman and the mysteries of sexuality. The woman stares out at us with eyes that are sad and despondent, revealing only emptiness. In a gesture of sorrow, she tears her flame-colored hair, which clings to the man beside her like so many burning strands. He turns away, a powerless, impotent figure. To the left, smoke rises from the smouldering trunk of a tree, a symbol of Munch's pessimistic view of the relationship between the sexes. The woman's white, unbuttoned and crumpled chemise reveals a bodice glowing red and tells of an innocence that has been lost. In stark contrast, the man is dressed entirely in black, lost in his thoughts as he turns away from her haunting presence. The colors are used symbolically, black, white and red, for sorrow, innocence and passion. The original title Munch gave to this painting was After the Fall. He's showing us a modern Adam and Eve in the moment after their fall from grace. The forest behind them looms dark and ominous, like a barrier that separates man and woman from their lost happiness in Eden. Now they find themselves in a barren landscape, where even the natural forms speak of death and decay. A stone takes on the appearance of a skull, a symbol of the brevity of human life. All forms are strongly simplified, and the contours emphasized in their rhythmic outline. Paint is applied thinly, at times literally running down the canvas. Munch no longer shows us nature portrayed as a true representation, searching instead for a visual equivalent to his inner emotional experience. I don't paint what I see, he said, but what I saw. In 1892, an exhibition of his work in Berlin caused such outrage that it had to be closed a week later. His uncompromising portrayal of emotion, stripped of any pretensions, to a bourgeois morality caused deep offense. It also won him enthusiastic acclaim amongst leading writers and critics. Munch often translated his compositions into other media, etching, lithography, and woodcut. In this lithograph from 1899, the interpretation of the female figure has changed dramatically. The woman has become a predator, a destroyer. A later version of 1896 continues this changing obsession. The woman that now dominates the composition has wild floating hair and the mask-like face of Medusa, the terrifying figure from Greek mythology who turned to stone those who looked upon her. The title of this work is now Ashes. By now, the smouldering tree trunk has disappeared, and all that remains of a burning passion is ashes. Yet the woman still exudes sexuality, as if driven by some insatiable desire. The despair expressed in the earlier painting is gone in this print. Instead, we have a woman consumed with arrogance, a pleasure-seeking creature. A photograph, taken around 1890, shows a young artist with a strong feeling for his own worth, but not perhaps an easygoing nature. At that time, he was living mostly in Berlin, where he created some of his most important symbolist paintings. Self-portrait with a cigarette shows Munch staring at himself in the mirror. As a child, he'd been deeply disturbed by the early death of his mother and his two sisters. This first shattering experience of suffering and death was to haunt him throughout his life. He could not free himself from the identification of sex and love with death and disease. This pessimistic view of sexual relationships he shared with the Swedish dramatist August Strindberg and with the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Melancholy, painted between 1892 and 93, is another intense exploration of an inner state of mind. It is one of a series of works Munch called The Frieze of Life, a poem of life, love, and death. Ashes also belongs to this sequence. The man and woman are frozen in attitudes of sorrow that convey the universality of human misery. Time and space are no longer relevant. The Scream is probably Munch's best-known painting. He describes how he came to paint it. One evening, I was walking along a path. I felt tired and ill. The sun was setting and the clouds turning blood red. I sensed a scream passing through nature. I painted the picture, painted the clouds as actual blood. The color screamed. Munch also painted many portraits in a comparatively representational style. Here, his sister Inga is clearly recognizable. In Anxiety, painted in 1894, Munch returns to the depiction of pure emotion. Forms again become simplified, faces mask-like, to emphasize the loneliness of man in the midst of a crowd. Munch's ambiguity towards women surfaces once more in this painting entitled Madonna. Previously he called it Loving Woman, a more earthly description. While the ecstasy in her face makes her seem distant and unattainable, her body tells a different story. Relaxed, almost abandoned, a glorification of womanhood, a modern-day icon. A painting that questioned the values of a conservative society, precisely because it did try to reveal the emotions that lie beneath the surface. In a later lithograph of Madonna, Munch was to add an embryo, cowering as if in fear of the life into which it will be born. Although he subsequently removed the fetus, the ambiguity remains. Munch's images were like recurring nightmares, which he sought to exorcise through a constant reworking. Ecstasy, despair, anxiety. Extreme states of mind. Munch never painted a picture cycle as such, but most of his works can be loosely related to each other, and they represent a consistent and very pessimistic view of life. He later referred to these works as the frieze of life. These were themes so powerful that they were to obsess him for 20 years. Munch had been prey to bouts of depression throughout his life, haunted by childhood memories, yet the issues he addressed were of universal significance, an iconography of what he described as modern psychic life. Here he's photographed with Tula Larsen, with whom he had a passionate but ill-starred love affair. He never married. Painting was to remain his obsession, and by 1908 he had driven himself to a complete nervous breakdown. Munch continued to paint to the end of his life. This photograph was taken on his 75th birthday. "In my art, I have attempted to clarify life and the meaning it holds for me," he once said. "I also wanted to help others explain life to themselves."